Hello, hello. It's me, the CT and the CTS. How's everybody doing today? We hope that you're all well. And we have a much better episode today. And I'm glad you are going to join us for this one because it's going to be great. It's going to be great. Joining me as always, my wonderful co-hosts, Mr. Fierro.
What's going on, sir? Glad to be here again.
Damn right.
I would, hopefully talk about something more cheery, but we'll see.
Absolutely. I don't even want to say it. Go for Mike.
Hey, Chris. Glad to be back. How you doing today, man?
I am doing much better than the last episode. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, you and me both.
And just so, by the way, I don't care what has happened since then. It doesn't matter to me, and I don't want to talk about it. So if that idiot resigned or got impeached, we don't know because we're recording this show a little early. And the reason we're recording this show a little early is because the guest that we have on, I really wanted to get him on the show today because I think his story is worth telling. We typically like to have subject matter experts on this show, and I would consider him to be a subject matter expert at beating cancer. He is a friend of the show, and I'm just curious, how did we meet? Did we meet him on a game show? No.
Love Curse? No.
The Love Boat. We met on the Love Boat. It's our hero, JT. JT, welcome to the CTS.
Thank you very much, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, I want to start this out by asking you certainly have life before cancer and life after cancer. One of the things that I was curious about right up front is, what's it like for you to think about life before cancer? Is that something that you do on a regular basis?
Yeah, I would say that it's funny because when I was diagnosed, I was only 35, and
Right.
I am 39 now, so I'll be 40 in a couple months. So before cancer, I never even thought about. I didn't think about death. I didn't think about end of life. I didn't think about. There's so many things I never really thought about. In fact, I've been pretty blessed in the fact that I didn't know anyone real close. I've had friends and coworkers, but nobody like immediate family, other than my grandmother who had passed away or even contracted any major illness. So it was when I was first diagnosed, I was completely taken aback. I'd never had surgery other than wisdom teeth being removed. I mean, nothing. Like, my ignorance levels to all of this stuff was extremely high.
Now, were you in good health?
Extremely. In fact, I had run a half marathon about 2 weeks before my diagnosis.
Wow.
Yeah, I've always been in good shape. I wouldn't say I eat very well. I mean, I eat well, but I don't eat great. I mean, I'm lucky. I'm tall and thin, so I don't have to worry about weight or what I eat ever. So I've always been kind of a big eater.
Sure.
And so it was no family history. Parents have never gotten cancer. Grandparents. I think I have a great grandfather who had cancer at like 80 years old. But
Wow.
kind of you start to expect those kinds of diseases when you're very old, so you don't expect in your 30s.
Right.
But-
So it was furthest thing on your radar at the time.
And to let your audience know, my cancer type was it technically would be classified as rectal cancer, but it's more colorectal cancer because it's on the verge between the two.
Right. And that's what I was going to ask you next is what kind of cancer was it? And can you take us through what that means?
So for those of you listening, colon cancer and rectal cancer, which they're very similar. They're treated almost the exact same way, but you'd rather get colon cancer, even though the positive to rectal cancer, the only positive to it, is that you will sometimes have symptoms earlier. And that's the reason they call colon cancer the silent killer, because quite often people don't know they have it until it's too late. And
Right.
it's a big problem, because it usually, when you get it, it'll be way up in your colon. And colon cancer itself is extremely treatable. If you catch it at stage 1 or even stage 2, you have like a 90% success rate in removal and not getting it again. But once it breaches the wall, then your odds start going way down.
Right. And we'll get to that in just a minute. By the way, I would rather not have any cancer if I could help it.
That is usually the preferable. The only cancer that it's funny, they say there's 2 cancers out there. They say that if you're going to get them, these are the ones you want, but obviously you never want any. Is I can't remember. Prostate cancer is highly treatable, and then
Right.
Thyroid cancer is super treatable. So those
Got
are
it.
the two. If you get those, you don't have to completely stress out.
So what was it that sparked you to go be seen by a doctor? Was there a symptom that you suffered?
Yeah, it's I think I might have had symptoms prior, but the first time I actually remember seeing symptoms is we were visiting my in-laws, and my wife and I had rented a cabin, and we had a little bit to drink. Actually, I would say a lot to drink, and that, I guess that aggravated it. But I went to use the bathroom in the morning, and I saw just an alarming amount of blood in the stool.
Wow.
And so I freaked out a little bit, almost went to the doctor then, which I should have. But I decided to put it off until I got back, because we were in North Carolina at the time and I live in Florida. And
Right.
we, I didn't see it again for probably 3 or 4 weeks. And then I saw it again, but it was a much smaller quantity. And I mentioned it, I called my father and just said, hey, and he goes, I have hemorrhoids all the time. I see blood here and there, nothing to be too worried. You're a young guy.
Sure.
Went on for another month or so where I'd see it here and there. Didn't really pay much mind to it. And I called, I think I had an annual physical, and I talked to the doctor about it. And he goes, well, you're a young guy, probably just hemorrhoids, and I didn't see it again for a little while.
Was this a doctor?
Yeah. This is common when you're a young person, because it's still rare, even though there's a whole group called On the Rise trying to bring attention to this, because in all my journeys, and a lot of the doctors I talk to, they say that there's a 50% increase in people under 40 getting colon cancer.
Wow. That's
And,
amazing.
So I kept having symptoms, and then I think, as a side symptom too, because it was becoming a more advanced stage, I started having prostate issues, and I went to a doctor for that. And when he did the dreaded prostate check, it hurt incredibly bad, like
Wow.
super bad. And at the time, I didn't realize why,
Right.
but he was pressing on the tumor.
Oh wow.
Oh, wow.
But he didn't feel it. He did, he said, nothing wrong with your prostate that I can tell.
So he was actually touching the tumor.
Well, he was pressing against things that pushed against it that caused the pain.
Okay.
I
Okay.
learned later.
Okay.
So, but at a certain point, I kept seeing blood like every time I went. Like, it was getting really bad. So I went to the doctor again, and he referred me to a specialist. And the specialist said, let's just go ahead and get a colonoscopy just to be safe, because really that's the only way to know.
Right.
Unless it comes up on a CT scan, which CT scans can miss them if they're not very large. So I eventually went to got a colonoscopy. And it's funny, the week of my colonoscopy, I almost canceled, because that week I changed my diet to be really healthy, because I was starting to get paranoid. I had cancer, and so I went on like this crazy super health. And during that time, I didn't see any blood.
So let me ask you this right in the middle there. You said that you suspected you had cancer?
Well, I was Googling, and when you read blood and stool,
Right.
that's like the number one thing. And granted, blood and stool can be a lot of things. It could be IBS. It could be, so many other things. But if you see blood, go get a colonoscopy. I mean, if you see it, one time, maybe not. But if you see it more than once, you've got to go get a colonoscopy because, it could be, there's fissures, there's so many things it could be. But if it is cancer and you don't catch it, you're in trouble.
Oh, definitely.
I will say with the invention of WebMD, almost any time I have a cold, I have cancer.
So true.
And they say stay off Dr. Google, but and also sometimes it pushes you to do it because I put this off almost a year.
Wow.
In January, and it was August that and had I gone in January, things might have been easier.
So you went through this for almost, what was that, January to August? That's 8
About
months?
8 months, yeah.
Wow.
Colon and rectal cancer can be, it's usually almost always a very slow cancer,
Right.
thankfully.
Yeah.
But that's also a negative because you don't really have. The symptoms I had were only blood, and I think I had increased frequency. But the problem with cancer is that they suspect I probably had it for 3 or 4 years.
No kidding.
Before I was diagnosed. And the thing is the symptoms are so gradual, you think you're just eating things that are upsetting you. Your stomach's just becoming more sensitive or whatever.
Right. That's amazing. So I want to fast forward a little bit because I want to know about the moment you learned of your diagnosis. All of this is leading up to going to get checked out, and you said you had your colonoscopy?
Yep. So I had my colonoscopy almost canceled. When I came to at the colonoscopy, the doctor said, "You almost certainly have cancer." As soon as he saw it, he knew right away.
How do you process that?
At the time, because I had so little cancer, I didn't take it as bad as you would think. Because at the time, I just, I didn't even know what to think of it. I didn't know how bad it was or what the journey I was about to embark on was. I knew nothing. It was kind of sad how little I knew. But, at first I was a little concerned, but I wasn't overly concerned. And then I kind of convinced myself, he's probably wrong. So I didn't think, I had to wait for the biopsy, which took about 2 weeks. And when the biopsy came back positive, that's when it started settling in and I started getting really, nervous about the whole situation.
Right. And why does it take 2 weeks for the biopsy to come back?
Because I went to a local doctor. If you go to big institute, and that's, we'll get to that. But when you go to a big institute, it's different. Then I went back to the doctor, and the doctor referred me to a surgeon because surgery is. I should have went to an oncologist first, but I decided for whatever reason I was referred to a local surgeon because I was going to local doctors in a smaller town.
Mm-hmm.
I live right outside a big town, but I was going to these local doctors because I didn't know any better. And one thing I will say to anyone and everyone who, if you get a cancer diagnosis, do not go to the local doctors. It's not that I don't respect them, not that I don't respect their education, but when people get out of school and they can go to either a small town or they can go to a big institute, the best of the best go to the big institutes. And it doesn't matter insurance wise, or if you have no insurance, it's all costs the same. In fact, the big institutes, when I look at my insurance bills, are typically cheaper than the local doctors were.
Who would have thought that?
Yeah. It's just, they get the volume. So they have, volume-based pricing. And the difference in doctors and, to go through that story, I went and met with a local surgeon. Seemed like a nice guy, seemed like he knew what he was doing, but he was a general surgeon. He didn't do that day in and day out. And I had scheduled the appointment for the surgery. It was a week and a half out. And I had a coworker whose wife, he's a much older coworker, his wife had brain cancer, and he kept going over and over and over telling me, get a second opinion, go to a big institute. So I finally decided to listen. I was like, well, let me just go. So I went to Cleveland Clinic, Florida. And as soon as they went through and did my, they did a scope and they were looking at it and they started going through, what they were going to do, I realized real quick their plan was 100 times better. And I just suddenly realized, wow, this local surgeon doesn't, the local surgeon was just going to, because mine was lower, so they were going to remove a portion of my rectum. Right. He was just going to remove the two pieces and connect them. That's all he was going to do. Right. Which today if I would have gone down that route, I probably would not be cancer free, and my quality of life would be horrifically low.
Wow.
So after I went to the Cleveland Clinic surgeon, he ended up referring me to their head surgeon down south, their head colorectal surgeon, because he says, look, you're a young guy. We're going to remove a lot of your rectum. And I ended up getting what's called a J pouch, where they cut your rectum as far down as they can and then pull part of your colon down and then widen it to become basically become your rectum again.
Oh.
So, and I didn't realize, honestly, I didn't understand everything they were saying or questioning.
Sure.
When I actually told the general surgeon that I decided to go to Cleveland Clinic, he actually was like, it's probably for the best. And he supported that decision.
Wow.
And so when I did the big surgery, it was a 5.5-hour surgery. I woke up, I had a bag, which I didn't even know what a bag was. I mean, that's how ignorant I was. They told me that it's a chance I could have to have a bag.
Right.
But to back up a little bit, when I got my scans, and this was the part I was most nervous about, I was scared, when they were scanning to see if it got into my lungs or liver.
Oh, yeah.
That's when, that's the first place colorectal cancer of any type goes to once it breaches the colon wall. So they didn't see any of that on the CT scans. They ended up doing an MRI to see how, for the surgery. But I didn't want to drive all the way down to Cleveland Clinic to have them do the MRI, because it would take longer for them to get the results.
Oh,
because I
sure.
had already scheduled the CT scan, that's another decision I regret to this day, because I went, and I should know this, my profession is, I do a lot of commercial lending, and I do the equipment lending. So I see this, but I didn't realize, I didn't think about it at the time. And it's another unfortunate knock on local doctors, is that the CT scans you see at a local, radiology place is a $400,000 machine with lower resolution than the $1.1 million machines they have at the Cleveland Clinics of the world.
Good
Oh, wow.
grief.
So they didn't see that you would have seen on their scan that I had lymph node cancer in lymph nodes too, that had spread.
Oh my God.
So it would have done a whole different treatment protocol, but because they went by the images from the local scanning, they didn't see them. So they went ahead and did the surgery. Thankfully, I was with such an experienced, great surgeon that he saw that it was more extensive. Once he got in there, he realized the lymph nodes looked inflamed. So he ended up taking way more than was originally planned. My surgery was originally only planned for 3 hours. And he went in and he took way more. Turned out it ended up being in 9 of 31 lymph nodes that he took.
Holy cow.
So that took me to stage 3C. Of course, then at the time when before the surgery, they told me I had no chemo because I was stage 2. They were just going to cut it out and be done with it. I woke up with a bag. Never had my entire life ever experienced anything like that. I took a lot of getting used to.
Take us through that. What are your thought process there?
I took it better than I thought I would. I think you get to a point, it's funny, somebody gave me a plaque later on, when my story gets worse, but somebody gave me a plaque later on that just says, you never know how strong you are until being strong is the only option you have.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of just in shock. You don't know what to think. You wake up, you have the bag, you don't even know, like they're kind of schooling you how to use a bag. I mean, for those of you unfamiliar with a bag, basically there's 2 different kinds. There's a coloscopy and an ileostomy. An ileostomy is what I had. They take a piece of your small intestine and basically it's hanging out of your stomach into a bag. And you have a bag that suctions to your stomach and you have no control over it. It's not like, and then stuff goes into the bag and you empty the bag, and it's a horrifying, scary experience. That's not as bad as you think it is once you get used to it. But at the time, for somebody who has no experience, I mean, people who have, severe colitis or IBS and things, some of them, a bag is a blessing. Like it changes their quality of life. But for me, it was to give me time to heal. So then that's when I started, I got the bag, get home, you're obviously out of work at the time because you're not going to be working through this.
And that's another thing. You're not doing anything. I mean, you're not at work. Um, what's your poor wife like through this whole time?
She's, she was my rock. She was, she stayed with me at the hospital, and then her job gave her some time off. Then when I got home, I was, once I was home, it wasn't too bad initially until the chemo started. And then you got to go through the process again, that set up, and then learn about that whole experience, which that was both the best and the worst part of it. Once I learned how to do chemo, I started chemo, and then for some people, and it's funny because they say younger people tend to react worse with chemo, but also because you're young and strong, so they give you the strongest possible dose they can give you. I was supposed to do 12 rounds of what's called FOLFOX, but on my first round, I was horrifically sick. I mean, horrifically sick. None of the anti-nausea stuff would work. I was fine. I actually worked through chemo, except for you would get a pump that would pump the worst stuff into you for 2 days, and then after the 2 days, you'd be so nauseous when they took that pump off, and then that Friday, Saturday was just horrific. Sunday, you'd start kind of coming back to life, and then Monday.
Was that through a service port that they installed in you?
Yeah. So I had a lot of surgeries. You did the big surgery you got a port first, then you did the big surgery, and then my second round of chemo I don't remember at all. My third round I don't remember at all either. But on my third round, that morning I started having horrific chest pains, and so my wife tells me that I asked her to take me, because I was supposed to have my port off. That was a Friday morning. This day I was getting my port off. So I asked her to take me to the hospital that morning because it was so bad. Like I don't remember it, but I kept telling her how bad it was. When we got to the hospital, we were about to go in, and then it started to feel better, I guess. So I decided to wait because my appointment was 2 hours. So we just waited in the parking lot, she said, at the place where I was getting the chemo off. So I was talking to them. They said it's probably severe heartburn, which is common with that chemo.
Sure.
So they sent me over. They had me do an EKG and a test. It was slightly abnormal, but not enough to concern them. So I went home that night, and then we were watching TV. She said it was about 20 minutes before we went to bed, and she said I just shot up and keeled over. And
no way.
So she called 911 because my lips were turning blue, and she didn't know what was going on. They had her start doing CPR, and it turns out that less than 1% of people, one of the ingredients in FOLFOX can cause your heart to spasm, and then spasm to a point where it beats so fast that it stops.
Wow.
My God.
So you were dead.
Yeah, for about 15 minutes. And then medics got here. They shocked me back to life. I crashed 6 times on the way to the hospital.
Oh my God.
And then when I got to the hospital, they ended up doing they call it cold incubation. Whenever you have that long of a cardiac arrest. So they put me on ice, and then it was about 4 days before they felt comfortable trying to take me out. And that's when
God.
My family, my wife, everybody, was on pins and needles because they didn't know if they were even going to be able to revive me, much less if I had brain damage or what. Nobody knew.
So do you have any memories of that?
Nothing. I don't remember. In the last couple of years, I've gotten little bits and fragments of things. I have no memory of the incident, of course, but I have little bits and pieces of the month prior. I remember my first round of chemo vividly.
Right.
The second round, I only have little fragments that have come back. Like my third round, right before my third round of chemo, it was over Christmas, so I think there was a week delay, and I have little tiny bits of memory being at my sister's house playing with the nephews, but that only came back in the last 2 years.
So they're filtering back to you over a short period of time.
Like something would suddenly spur a little memory, but for a while there, I had zero memory of the entire month. I didn't remember any of it.
So how does your brain reconcile that? Because 1 minute you're going through chemo, and the next minute you're waking up on ice in a hospital somewhere?
Well, when I first came to, the first day, they thought I had possibly had some. Then they said it would be normal, but the first day I just talked crazy. They said I didn't
Right.
have any idea who I was, where I was, what I was doing. I just talked crazy. Um, and then the second day, I mean, I do remember being in the hospital, and I was incredibly weak. I slept most of the time. It took months for me to get back to semi normal. I mean, I could, when I got home, at the time we had a large dog. Because that is weird, kind of a weird side story, but this year that I was actually going to go get checked sooner, I think it was February or March, but then one of my dogs just died, like all of a sudden, like out of the blue.
Wow.
He just, he keeled over. They think he had maybe a cancerous tumor that burst. That's the only thing. I mean, he's an old dog, so he was 13. And then
Sure.
my other dog was 12, I want to say at the time. And she, that same month, a month after my other dog we found a tumor on her tongue. It was,
Wow.
so we had that removed. And I decided we were going to take care of the dog and get all that stuff done before I bother with myself, which is stupid.
Priorities.
I mean, I
Priorities,
just
man.
wasn't that worried about myself,
Sure.
Did you live by a power plant by chance?
I don't live that terribly far from one.
Oh, wow.
It's a little alarming. But I mean, like when you look at that and statistics locally and everything, it's pretty normal. So yeah, it's something I've kind of always worried about because of that. And then when after I got out, after the cardiac arrest, they had to put an incubation tube down my throat, and it caused my vocal cords to get strained severely. So I couldn't speak. I could only speak in a whisper. And that went on for a month well, actually longer than that, because I had cardiac arrest, I want to say, like, I think it was the day before New Year's. And
Holy mackerel.
I didn't have a voice back until March.
Good grief.
So I could only whisper. So that was really frustrating. And then having to deal with a bag when you're extremely weak, that was super challenging as well. And then the other challenge we have is now they don't know what to do with the chemo.
How to proceed.
Right. I was just going to ask.
Yeah, that was a big problem. We stopped my chemo entirely for a little while, and the Cleveland Clinic doctors really didn't want to put me back on because, technically it's adjunctive therapy, but my odds of reoccurrence are very high. I mean, I have, my 5-year survival rate with stage 3C cancer is 30%.
Right.
And then cardiac arrest, they're trying to figure out, was it cancer? Was it your heart? So now I'm getting all these tests from my heart now to see. They're like, hey, your heart will kill you today, the cancer will kill you tomorrow. So we got to deal with the heart.
Yeah.
Turns out I have nothing wrong with my heart. Absolutely nothing.
Well, that's good.
It's just, I have a very low heart rate. My heart rate's normally in the 40s. Might be from running, who knows? But that had nothing to do with it. And so eventually, they kind of left it up to me. They're like, we can do chemo, but you're going to be hospital administered, which sucks. You're going to be in the hospital for 12 weeks.
Definitely.
And there's still a high risk it could stop your heart. So I started doing I ended up getting a defibrillator installed, which not a normal one, like your pacing. It's a new kind they called SICD. They put it in your side and it just goes over your, basically if it stops, it'll blast you. If not, you don't have to worry about it. The only thing that kind of scares you, if you get your heart rate too high on accident, you could get hit. I've always been paranoid, but I mean, we're going on 4 years now. And
right.
Happens. So I have a little bit of insurance if it stops. But I ended up doing a ton of research. I ended up getting second opinion at Moffitt. And, they said you could try doing radiation, but your quality of life would be so bad. And the percent chance that it would help you would be minimal. And then the other option would be, so I started looking into clinical trials, and I ended up finding one at the University of Pittsburgh for a vaccine that in the first run, you can search for the stuff yourself. And the bad part is that doctors, because of lawsuits and malpractice and everything else, they're going to do standard of care. And you can ask them about if their facility is doing the clinical trial, then they may recommend one. But if they're not the ones doing it, they're afraid to recommend it, which is kind of one thing I've learned throughout all of this is that your medical care is entirely in your hands, and it doesn't even matter if you're in other countries. I've talked to people on message boards and forums for years now, and it doesn't matter if you're in a a place where healthcare is free, or if you're in the U.S. or you're somewhere else. It's all the same. You got to take your healthcare into your own hands and figure out what the best action is going to be for you, because it's doctors are going to always recommend the standard of care for the most part. You may get a rare doctor who's willing to go out on a limb and look at these alternative treatments, but
Sure.
very few of them will.
Sure. That's good advice.
And so I ended up finding this clinical trial. It was at the University of Pittsburgh. I ended up having to fly there every other week for 4 months on my
Okay.
own dollar.
So you flew from Florida to Pennsylvania every 2 weeks.
Yep,
Is that
to
right?
get an experimental vaccine to prevent it from coming back, because
Wow.
that's my biggest risk today is, will it come back?
Right.
I get scanned every 6 months to check for it. I have had 3 colonoscopies in the last 4 years. Thankfully, I don't have to do another one again for 2 years now. I think I did one about a year ago.
Right.
And that vaccine sucked because it had no side effects, which was great. But they do what's called electrical portation. And how the vaccine worked is that it's basically a vaccine that you get injected into you. Then they shock your cells to make them basically go back to like an infant state. And then they put this genetic code in there to tell your cells to kill cancer.
Wow.
Wow.
Holy cow.
That's
But-
like space age.
The part that you don't realize is they tell you they're going to do what's called electrical portation. So they're going to send a small electrical current through your body. You're like, oh, okay, great. But they don't tell you that this 5 needle thing they jab in the back of your leg hits you like you put your hand in an electrical socket.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, it was brutal.
I saw that
And I
coming.
had to do that 4 times. So,
Oh. Oh, man. So you did that. You flew from Florida to, you'd say Pittsburgh?
yep.
Is that where it
did
was?
that.
Okay.
And then once a month I got the shot, and then once every 2 weeks they did a battery of tests. Yeah, it was very painful, but it was only painful for 5 minutes. So, and after going through horrible surgeries and everything else that I'd gone through, it was a small price to pay.
That answered my question.
Yeah, I had to fly up there. I did every other week for 4 months, and then I had to go back for further testing a year later. And then initially I had to fly up there because I explored a couple different clinical trials. I flew to Duke University, and they wouldn't let me in because of my heart issue. They were actually the clinical trials I looked into. That was my last one. I'd given up at that point, and that was one I didn't even think I'd be able to get in based on the criteria. And I just randomly sent the doctor an email, and they ended up accepting me.
Wow. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah, there's no way to know for 100% sure if that is the reason I didn't have reoccurrence, or if the surgeon just did a great job, or the 3 rounds of chemo I got was enough. I mean, there's clinical trials, lots of clinical trials going on right now where they've cut back on the 12 dose and moved to 6 because it's the side effects are so much lower long term.
how many people had done the clinical trial before you had entered it?
A couple hundred in the phase 1. I was a phase 2 trial where they had opened it up, different cancer types, and
What was their success rate at that point?
the phase 1 was very high. I think 80% of people didn't have a reoccurrence.
Wow.
And that was the reason and then in the animal trials, they were super successful. So that was the reason I wanted to get into that one. And I ended up getting lucky because I didn't know which arm I'd be in. I didn't do any of I did refuse to do any of the ones that had a blind study. Because I didn't want to spend that much of my own money flying back and forth to some place if there was a chance I wasn't even going to get anything.
Yeah.
The arm I was in ended up being the highest dose of 2 different ones at the same time. So I was like, well, that's probably better odds. Higher chance of side effects, but better odds.
Wow.
Get something that helps. So
Now, the electromagnetic, basically the pulses that they used against you didn't have any negative effects to your heart? Because I know you said you
No.
had that attached already.
no, I had because they had I guess they ended up having some cardiologist review that, and they said it wouldn't be a problem. I guess it doesn't affect this. I don't know why. It doesn't make sense to me, to be honest with you. But I mean, it didn't really feel like you're getting electrocuted as much as you're getting stabbed with a big knife really fast.
Well, I mean, I had one question about what you have on your heart, because you have that currently, right?
Yeah.
And if your heart gets beating too fast, it'll shock you?
The initial settings at 180, but they bumped mine to 220 beats per minute.
Well, I guess my question is, how tame are date nights in your house?
That's why I had them bump it up to 220.
Okay.
You don't have to worry about that. But I
awesome.
have. It's funny. I about a year and a half right before the pandemic, I had started that. I don't know if you've heard of what's called 9-round. It's kickboxing, and you have a heart monitor on while you're watching. And I got scary close a couple times. I'm trying to get back into shape, and as you can imagine, you have a good excuse to get pretty out of shape during all this. So.
Right.
Oh, definitely.
But what was even crazier is that my dog, during all this, like as I'm looking into these clinical trials, while I was gone getting my scans to make sure it hadn't spread, and then also because you can't have active cancer to be in the trial, so they did a ton of tests to check for cancer. And then my dog collapsed at my house with my wife home while I was in Pittsburgh, because she wasn't able to come with me every time, because one, it was just getting excessively expensive, especially with me getting being out of work and everything else at the time. I was still getting some pay, but it was reduced because I'd been out for a month and FMLA at this point. And our dog had liver cancer, and she'd collapsed, so they'd do emergency surgery on her.
Wow.
And it turns out, when I finally got into the trial, she had liver cancer, and she had the cancer that was on her tongue was a type of skin cancer. I can't think of the name of it right now, but it had spread into her cheek. So she ended up getting an experimental vaccine that was very similar to what I was getting at the vet, because at this point, after everything we had gone through, this is our last dog. We were going to pay whatever it cost. We didn't care.
Yeah.
So we were getting vaccines every other week on opposite weeks. So I'd take her to the vet one week, and then I'd go myself the following week. She ended up living a year with that vaccine. So, and she was 14. So, and she was a Rottweiler mix. So it's a big dog at 14 years old. It's amazing she made it as long as she did.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But at that point, I was, I wanted to, in my mind at the time, because I was very paranoid about myself, my goal was just to outlive her at that point.
Yeah, and I can only imagine.
So how long after your last round with the vaccine did they finally label you cancer-free?
Yeah.
Well, I was cancer-free before the vaccine. So
because of the surgery?
Yeah, I mean, technically you're considered, but I was classified high risk of reoccurrence.
Gotcha.
So now because I'm 4.5 years, actually in February next month, almost a month from today, I'll get my 4.5 year scan. I get scanned every 6 months.
Right.
I had a big scare a little less than a year ago where they saw something they called the presarcal region. And it was a fluid buildup, and then it looked like a node, and I ended up having to get a PET scan.
Oh, sure.
So, and I got super paranoid because they really thought it had returned. They kind of expected it to return. They thought I was lucky that it hadn't returned after this much time. And so they were going to zap it with radiation, cut it out, and then we were going to contemplate chemo again.
Oh.
And then, because there's been some advancements in that, a little bit of advancements in that with some other types that they could try. But, so I was having kind of mental breakdown at this point. And, but thankfully the PET scan came up with nothing. And then my last CT scan, it must have just been some fluid buildup. That was a complicated, just side effect from the surgeries.
Sure. And that's good news.
Do they actively monitor you?
Yeah, I get every 6 months, I get full body scan.
Is that for the study? Are they still
the study I'm
you
done
for it?
No,
Yeah,
I did
it's completely
the study
done
was
now.
a 2-year thing. I did, because I had the cancer diagnosis in August. I had the surgery in October, the cardiac arrest in December. February, I got the, implant end of February. I was kind of, now thinking back, it seems like that was really fast. It's 2 months after my cardiac arrest. They did the surgery to put that in. And then I started the clinical trial in March.
Wow.
And then I actually went back to work in March. I didn't have to. I could have stayed out the rest of the year. But at that point in time, I needed normalcy back in my life. So I
Right.
asked to come back.
Definitely.
For the rest of your life, are you considered high risk for reoccurrence?
Actually, no. I moved at 4 years. I actually moved into the low to moderate risk of reoccurrence.
Okay.
So that was a huge milestone. 'Cause every year, your first year, you're super high risk. Your second year, once you pass the 2-year marker, you start to get a little bit safer. But unfortunately, between the 2 and 3 years seems to be when most people find it again. So I was really, really paranoid that year. And then once I got past the 3-year marker, it's kind of just on a grid, your percent odds. Like in the first year, it's like a 78% chance of returning. And then now I'm in like the low 20s, or maybe even less than that. I might be in the teens at this point after this next
Awesome.
scan. And once you pass 5-year, normal colon cancer, it's all your odds are like anybody else's. With rectal cancer, unfortunately, your 6th year, you still have like a 3% chance of it returning.
Right.
Statistically, they'll monitor me. I'll get annual scans for 5 more years after my 5-year marker.
So is that when they're going to consider you to be 100% clear?
Yeah, I
Like-
mean, after 5 years, you're
Okay.
pretty good. But just because people who've had cancer, you're statistically you're not much higher than the average person, but they still feel like there may be genetic anomalies that would possibly
More
make you higher
more
risk.
disposed.
Yeah, more disposed to it. So I'll get scans for 5 years. The problem is too is the stupid scans and the chemo have a side effect of giving you cancer. So
Of course.
yeah, it's not real high, but it's still your odds get increased from all the scans. You don't want to get the scans, but if you don't get the scans, your odds of death from the cancer, if you happen to get it, are 100%. So
Wow.
it's
Well-
it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't type of thing.
Right.
So the safer bet is to just keep getting checked. Until
Absolutely.
in Australia they have some blood tests that's making its way our way sooner than later, where they can detect cancer via blood way sooner than scans even can.
Oh, nice.
That'd be pretty nice.
So
That would be.
that seems like it's going to become reality sooner than later.
Good.
And then they can do the PET scans and the heavy duty scans to figure out where it is, but at least they know you have it or not.
So what's your quality of life like today?
I would say, you wouldn't know I ever had cancer if you met me and talked with me. And I would say I have some surgical scars, but they did robotic arm surgery. So it was, it's minimal. I mean, if I do heavy labor too long, I'll have pains in my lower right side where my ileostomy was.
Yeah.
I'd say I probably go a little more than the average person, but not much. I mean, it's pretty much all back to normal for the most part.
Yeah.
Um,
And I mean,
I
chicks
have
dig
a
scars.
little bit. Yeah. Yeah, I have a couple of them. I got the port scar, the scar from the device that they installed. I mean, but it's very small. I mean, it's the size of a sand dollar on my side. You
Sure.
can barely even see it. So it's I would say my quality of life is very good. I mean, I'm very fortunate to be able to go through all of that and still not have I'm not limited in any way.
Yeah, it's amazing for what you had to battle through.
So it's I mean, I would say anybody with cancer, and it doesn't matter your cancer type, especially if you have a high grade cancer, just the mental part is some of the hardest sometimes. And even that starts to fade. Now it's starting to feel like a bad memory.
I just think I would feel weird during the colonoscopy if they told me I've had cancer. Because I've had 2 before, and they were just like the natural, I'm at that age where, you go and get it checked. And usually, as soon as they pull the camera out, it's right next to the bathroom. So it'd be hard for me to process that while I'm on the
Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, I'd never had one before, So, it was all new. I think now it would be a lot harder, but at that time I didn't know what to think. I didn't know how bad it was or how good it was or anything. I didn't know anything about cancer.
Oh,
I mean, I was
yeah.
clueless.
That first colonoscopy, man, that's an experience.
Yeah. It'll get you.
I've had 4 now, so
Yeah, you're a pro.
I'm a pro.
Just loosen up and let it happen.
That's
I've even got the prep down. And that's the worst part. I mean,
the prep.
yeah. The night before, I mean, it's funny because the first one I did with the local doctor, they give you the jug of green crap.
Yeah.
Which is just horrific. The Cleveland Clinic just they have you drink a bottle of Miralax and drink some Gatorade and call it a day.
Wow. Wasn't Miralax the stuff that they used in Dumb and Dumber?
Yes.
Okay.
That makes it okay.
I just wanted to make a movie reference there.
Yeah. But I encourage anybody, if you're having symptoms, especially if you see blood, go get it checked, because if it's stage 1, I mean, honestly, if all I had to do was the surgery and it wasn't the big, as big a surgery, if it was just normal, they chop a little piece of your colon out, that sounds horrifying, but really it's not. I mean, you'll be in the hospital for 4 or 5 days. You'll be up and moving around the second day. You'll be home for a month, and then it'll be like it never happened. If you have to do all the other crap.
Yeah, and if there's any one thing that you would want to come out of this, it is early detection will save your life.
Yep. If you have, and unfortunately, if it's real high, you may not see blood. So if you have permanent bowel changes, get it checked out, because it can save your life. Because once it gets to your lungs or liver, your odds start going way down. I mean, I've met in my journey a lot of stage 4 people who have survived. They've had to do major liver surgeries and stuff, but it just depends on where it ends up. And then if you can find, I mean, there's a doctor in, it's Memphis, Tennessee. She will do liver surgeries that no one else will do. That other doctors are just afraid to do, but she's had a high success rate. So she's kind of the liver person to go to. So, and anybody listening to this, if you have questions, if you go on Reddit, you can find me. We'll put some contact information on there if you want to reach out to me. I'll be happy to answer any of your questions.
Absolutely. We will do that. And I just want to say that you're a big inspiration, and I think that you have heroically, what's the way I want to say that?
Survived.
You survived, but you did more than survive. You fought. I think that's admirable, and I think that people should look up to you, and I think this should be an uplifting episode because you're still here.
And I would say, the attitude is a big thing. You gotta come at it that you're going to beat it. You have to. I mean, mind over body. I mean, there's too much evidence in all the placebo studies out there that it definitely means something.
Yeah. PMA, positive mental attitude.
Positivity helps.
That's it. That's it.
Find some reason to live for. It doesn't matter what it is, who it is, how it is. Just find a reason.
Loved one, a pet. The fact that Mike's looking for that $2,000 stimulus.
There's my reason, baby.
Oh my goodness. Well, listen, everybody. I want to thank all of you for tuning in today to what is so far my favorite episode of CTS. JT, I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story with our audience. And once again, I just want to say congratulations on beating cancer, and we will share your info on Reddit for our people to see.
Thanks a lot for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it was great, man.
And with that, we're going to bring this episode of CTS to a close. I want to invite you, if you like what you hear, subscribe, hit us up on social media. That is Truby Show on Twitter and on Facebook, The Chris Truby Show. And we will be back next week with another fantastic episode. And until then, we'll see you on down the road. Thanks, everybody.